On June 13th of 1973, the final film in the original timeline of Apes movies, Battle for the Planet of the Apes, was released in theaters, and along with it came the results of not only a negative critical reception, but also the lowest grossing total for the series. This left the Apes franchise to fall out of popularity, and another theatrical project wouldn't be released until Tim Burton directed a remake in 2001. With that being said, in between these two movies, a ton of plans to relaunch the series was going on, and one of them happened to have Arnold Schwarzenegger, of all people, join in on the project for the starring role. The Planet of the Apes series fell into development hell after the release of 1973's Battle, but Fox was adamant that another project could get off the ground as soon as they found a winning formula, which started to materialize after the company noticed Adam Rifkin, who wanted to make a direct sequel to the first film, ignoring everything that led up to Battle for the Planet of the Apes. His movie would have started with the ending of the original film, where Charlton Heston looks up at the Statue of Liberty before moving 300 years into the future, where the apes had entered their Roman days. It was basically supposed to be a version of Planet of the Apes meets Spartacus. Now, all of this started in 1988, but several years after that, Oliver Stone got attached as a producer, and he brought on Terry Hayes to write the movie, who you may want to remember because he wrote a couple of little old classics like, The Road Warrior, Beyond Thunderdome, and even Reign of Fire. Oliver Stone had previously done big movies like Platoon, and had a hand in writing Scarface, as well as early drafts of Conan the Barbarian. Speaking of that guy, Arnold would come into the project around now, starring as a scientist named Will Robinson, who was involved in a story where humanity finds out that a disease is embedded in their DNA. A couple of people go back thousands of years in time so that they can stop the disease at its origin, but soon discover that it was genetically engineered by those advanced apes in order to kill mankind in the future. Philip Noyce, the director of Patriot Games and Clear and Present Danger, was set to helm the project, which probably would have been released sometime in the 1990s, around the time Schwarzenegger was working on Last Action Hero, all the way up to End of Days. The screenplay really impressed everyone at the studio, but there were a few people that thought that it needed a bit of a lighter tone. There's even rumors saying that Dylan Sellers, an executive, wanted to include a comedic scene where the apes play baseball. The way I've always heard it, Arnold Schwarzenegger apparently teaches the apes how to play the game or something, and the executive fired Terry Hayes after the writer decided to leave that part out. What a weird request. This eventually led to the director giving up and several other people to pull away from the project as well, with probably only Arnold left in any substantial role. Now, the company eventually brought on Chris Columbus to direct, who had just done the first two Home Alone movies, and he hired Sam Hamm, the writer of 1989's Batman, to pen the new script. This time the story was supposed to involve an ape astronaut that came to Earth and unleashed a devastating virus. The scientists go to the home planet of this strange ape and find a weird place where apes hunt humans in a similar way to what we saw in the original movie. Arnold apparently is able to locate a cure so that he can save the world, only when he gets back, he finds Earth overrun by the apes, which is extremely similar to the ending of Tim Burton's 2001 remake that got a lot of people talking way back in the day. I still remember that Abraham Lincoln statue like it came out yesterday. So for whatever reason, Fox felt like this script wasn't good enough, and that made Columbus leave the project in 1995, but hold on to your butts, because this is where James Cameron stepped in to produce. Rumors have it that he previously wanted Arnold to play Alan Grant in his version of Jurassic Park that never got made, so he probably wasn't about to let this science fiction project get off the ground without his stamp on it. Cameron wanted to go in a totally different direction with the story, and Schwarzenegger remained on standby, but after a little movie called Titanic made a whole lot of money in the late 90s, James Cameron jumped ship and abandoned the project altogether. Fox tried as hard as they could to get other people involved to direct, but it just didn't work out. Of course, this would eventually lead to Arnold finally saying screw it and Tim Burton moving in to direct a remake of the 1968 original. During its development, this movie was going under the name Return to the Planet of the Apes, and later Return of the Apes once Arnold got involved. It started out as a direct sequel to the very first movie and ultimately wound up being a wild reimagining that came out in the early 2000s, but the actual pre-production phases of this thing are pretty wild and interesting in my own personal opinion. I've watched the development of something like Jurassic Park 4 evolve and change over time, with ideas like dinosaur-human hybrids fighting drug lords and militant people living in the Alps somewhere. That stuff came and went, but even that big franchise never had all of these different names for producers, writers, and directors come and go. What other unmade project do you know that had people like Oliver Stone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Terry Hayes, Sam Hamm, Chris Columbus, and James Cameron walking in and out of the office over the course of a decade? We're talking about a really interesting revolving door of talent here that ultimately went unused. In the end, I think a sequel to the original movie starring Arnold would probably have been a good idea around 1994, 95, or 96, but it probably wouldn't have been as good as it could have been if they watered it down with a lot of comedic elements forced into the plot. A hardcore Arnie action movie set on the planet sounds badass, but ultimately that's just not what we got to see. I am curious to find out what James Cameron would have done with the idea, because not much is really known about his take on the story, although I do find it interesting that immediately after he made a boatload of money with Titanic, he went on to do Avatar, another movie about alien creatures going up against humans in a very, species versus species sort of way. Could there have been some crossover there? Maybe, but all in all, the only thing that really makes me think of is how much better Avatar would have been with Arnold freaking Schwarzenegger in the movie. But yeah, that's just my own personal opinion. Anyways, guys, these are all just my thoughts on this particular subject matter. Now, what do all of you think about Return of the Apes, the unproduced Arnold Schwarzenegger sequel that would have involved a deadly virus threatening to kill mankind? Do you think that sounds cool? I do. Or are you happy that it never got made? Now, whatever your own thoughts and opinions happen to be, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below.